Hello, welcome to another video of Code Snippet. So in this video, we are going to look into one of the important topic inside Spring. The name of the topic is aspect-oriented programming. So this is a basic topic which is very important in order to learn the future topics that we are going to look into, for example, transactions. So let's directly jump into it. So sit back, relax and enjoy the show. So aspect-oriented programming, right? Aspect-oriented programming helps to intercept a method invocation. Now, what do you mean by intercept? It means that you can perform certain action before calling that method and certain action after calling that method, right? Same thing I have written over here. We can perform some task before and after method invocation, right? It's kind of a dynamic. It just writes some AOP or AOP class and that will do the job for you, right? So that is basically aspect oriented programming inside your Spring, right? Now let's see. Now, what is the purpose, right? What is the purpose of doing this? Let's say there is a logging mechanism that you want to implement inside your project, right? And you want it dynamic. You don't want to write it with your method logic, right? Method will have certain logic. You don't want to write logging along with it. What you can do is you can write your aspects, right? So that boilerplate code, what we have inside that logging thing and everything, you can extract that inside your aspect and that will do the job of its own. And you can just focus on your business logic inside your method, right? So same thing I'm writing over here, that AOP allows you to handle boilerplate code and repeated code like logging, transaction management, and allows you to focus on the business logic, right? So that's what is here. And aspect is kind of a module which handles that particular boilerplate for you, right? And this also helps in achieving reusability, right? You can reuse this particular aspect that you wrote for one class. Same logging mechanism you can use for other class as well, right? So reusability again is coming into picture. Good thing, right? So again, used during logging, transaction management, security purpose, and many more things you can implement, right? Now let's just go into code and let's check it out. So here I have one application, AOP demo, right? And here I have one controller package, service package, and one aspect package. In controller, I have the sample controller. It's a REST controller having a sample, very basic API, get student, which will just return the string. And it's a get mapping basically. And inside service we are yet to implement. We will implement that in a while, right? And after that, in aspect I have one logging aspect, right? So it's kind of a Spring component and we mark it using @aspect annotation, right? So @aspect, when we mark a class, it will convert it to basically aspect, right? Now do you see this function over here? So this function, as we are using before annotation, so we are going to look into all this thing, right? So don't worry about that now. So just think that this particular function will be invoked before some other function, right? Which function? That we are going to pass over here, right? So what I'm passing over here, I'm passing public string and I'm giving entire package to a function com.codesnippet.aopdemo controller student controller and get class, that is ultimately being your this class. Ideally, as we are discussing, as we are giving before, this particular method should be invoked before execution of this particular method, right? This particular method get student, right? Now what I will do, I'll just add a print statement over here, just in order to check that when this particular statement is being printed, right? So let's see. Now what I'll do, I'll rerun this application, right? So here, from here, we will start the application. So let it start basically. Right, so our application is started. Now what I will do, I will go inside this particular browser and hit that particular URL. So I already have this URL. What I will do, I will reload, right? So it will make a API call again, right? So here if you see, inside logs, I'm sure you will be able to see this. So first, what is printing inside before method area aspect, right? So first, this particular aspect is being called, right? So this is basically a string which we have printed over here. After that, what is being called? Get student, right? Which is kind of a log that we have added inside controller. That means this particular aspect method is being called before execution of this particular function, this one, right? So that is basically before, and after you can do by using just after annotation, right? Now if we reload this application, let's see what happens, right? So application is up. Let me reload this API. As you can see now, get student called is first printed. That means first the function is called and after that your after method is called. as we are using after now, right? So that is before and after. So we were discussing over here, right, that some task before and some task after method invocation, right? So that is a basic demo, right? Now we understand the purpose of this guy aspect, right? To perform certain task before and after of your method execution, right? Now let's jump into this particular line. What is this? Okay, so this particular line we called as point cut expression, right? This particular line is a point cut expression. Okay, it's kind of a terminology they use, right? Point cut expression. Now we will see what it is now, right? So this annotation before, after, around we can use, and inside that you have first point cut, that is execution. Okay, so it's kind of a type of your point cut expression, right? So execution, this means this particular method will be called after the execution of this method. What is this method? Public string and entire package name up to the controller plus method name that we are giving over here, right? So this method will be called after the execution of this method, right? So that's how you read it. Okay, so this is one type of point cut expression. Okay, so let's go back to this. So we are seeing point cut expression now, right? We are seeing point cut expression, basically expression which tells where an advice should be applied. What is advice? Advice is basically this particular chunk, right? So this is basically a function, they call it as advice basically, right? Now expression which tells where advice should be applied, right? And it is based on this point cut expression basically, right? When to trigger this function, for example, this method should be called after the execution of this function, right? So that's how again we will read it, right? Now here there are many types. Okay, so first one here which we are seeing is a execution, right? So there are many types basically, so let's go through them one by one, right? So that is basically the next agenda for us. We see 7 over here, so let's go through them one by one, right? So execution we are seeing over here that matches a method inside a particular class, right? Matches a method inside particular class. Now this public is something which is not mandatory, it's optional field. Even if you remove it, things will still work. It's like it will scan all public and private methods inside your class and it will try to check for your get student, right? And this basically is return type, right? And after that you have this particular function, right? So that is basically execution, right? So execution we seen already, but there are few more things to look into, right? So first one is, let's say, wildcard. Okay, so let's say there are certain function for which you don't know the return type. What you can do is you can just replace it with star. Let me rebuild the application meanwhile. Let me redeploy it. So basically star means any return type will do, right? Any return type, whatever return type this have, let's say there is a get student function, let it have string or let it have response entity or anything, it will still match it because we are giving asterisk. It's kind of a wildcard character, right? So that's why it will match it basically. Now if I reload this, oh, not this one. If I reload this one, then as you can see our aspect is still being called, right? That means our asterisk is basically working fine, right? Now next point is you can also pass the variable over here. Now hypothetically, let's say get student is accepting integer id, right? So along with adding a parameter to get student, I have also made it path variable so that we can invoke it from Postman, right? So what I will do, go to Postman now. First let me check if application is up. It is up. Now what I will do, I will just hit this from Postman. We got the response. Now if you see, our aspect is not called. What is the matter? Why it was not called? It was not called because we are not passing anything inside get student, right? Get student should have that particular id, right? So what you can do, you can pass just integer over here, that a method which is accepting integer as a parameter, you invoke this particular aspect on top of that or after that or according to the point cut, right? Now here I restarted the application. Now let me hit it again. Now if you see, it will be called because we have added a integer over here, right? Now what I can do, I can make it star, right? So be it any parameter, at least one, it should be invoked, be it of any type, string, integer, anything, this particular function should be invoked. Now if I restart my application again and let's hit this particular API again, then you will see that this is still being called because of this asterisk, right? Other thing you can do is you can replace this get student with star as well. So basically this means that any function which will have any parameter inside your controller, student controller, will come into picture in this case, right? So that is again basically one use case, right? So anything you can replace with star and it will consider everything basically. This will mean that okay, in controller package everything you can mark it like that, right? You can execute this particular method before or after any class, any function, any parameter inside that controller package. So that is how you can use asterisks basically, right? Now you can play around with it. You can try to put it anywhere and see if things are working according to your use case, right? So asterisk is basically one part and other part is wildcard. Okay, so there is another wildcard, that is dot dot, right? So let's see how you can use dot dot in here now, right? So what I can do over here is, let's say I remove this and just have dot dot. This means inside com.code snippet, be it any package in between which has student controller. So let's say com.code snippet, there may be another package, let's say AOP demo, there will be AOP implementation, let's say, right? In that particular package, if you have controller and inside that controller, if you have get student along with parameter, any parameter, then you invoke this particular method. So this is again one wildcard that you can use, right? Or you can remove this one as well for that matter. Now you can say that com.code snippet, in this particular package, any get student method with one parameter or any type of parameter, you invoke this particular method. So this is again another wildcard that you can use, right? So dot dot is again another wildcard. So this also you can play around according to your use case, right? So whichever classes in your entire application you want to invoke this particular aspect, according to that you can set your point cut expression. So that's how basically you can use it, and that is the second wildcard for you. And we have seen first execution basically by now, right? So this particular execution is completed, right? So execution we have completed. Now let's move to within, right? Now what is within matches all method within any class or package, right? Let me remove this and let's add a new expression. There we go. So this is basically within. So within student controller, whatever functions are there, apply this particular aspect, this particular function on top of that. So this particular advice should be applied on top of any function that is present inside student controller, right? So again, if we redeploy our application, let's see what happens. I'll go to Postman and hit it again. So let's see what is happening. So before this particular function is invoked, our aspect is being invoked, right? So as you can see over here, so this basically before is also working, right? And same wildcards you can apply over here as well, right? So if you do this, this will again do the same task that we have discussed earlier, right? So that is the use of within basically. So within also we have checked, right? So within. Next is @within, right? Matches any method in a class which has this annotation. Okay, so what I can do over here is, let me convert it to within. So what I'll do first, I'll go to service and let's add a method over here. So I have just added a sample method over here. So how within we can use is, so classes which have, let's say, this particular annotation, let's say service. So our student class will have service annotation, right? So classes that have this particular annotation, so it's kind of org spring framework stereotype service, right? So this is basically annotation. So classes that are annotated with this particular class, this particular aspect will be applied on top of method present inside that particular class, right? So our student service is annotated with @service, and this function is basically present inside a service which is marked with @service annotation. So ideally this should be invoked when this function will be invoked. So in order to invoke this, let's write some code. What I'll do, I will auto wire student service over here, right? So this is basically dependency injection. You will know that if you are following the series. If you're not following, go ahead and check this particular video, you will understand it. And what I will do over here is, I will just call the method student service dot get student, right? And this is basically invocation of service, and before the invocation our aspect should be printed. Now let's redeploy this and let's see what happens. Our app is up. Now let me hit again. So that worked. Now here, if you can see inside our aspect, after that what is coming, get student in service class. So basically before this particular method, our aspect is being invoked as per our point cut expression, right? So that is basically within for you. Functions inside classes which are annotated with @service will come into picture if we use this particular point cut expression that is within, right? So that is within for us that we have seen. Next is annotation, right, which matches any method that is annotated with given annotation, right? So this is for classes. Now annotation is for functions, right? So what I will do, I will just add, let's say we have a get mapping over here in controller, right? So what I will do, I will copy this get mapping from here and I will just put it here inside our point cut, so that this particular function is annotated with get mapping, right? So before this particular function invocation, our friend this aspect should be invoked. Now I will comment this service for time being and let's rerun this application, right? So app is up. Let me hit this API again. Now as you can see inside before method invocation, so before invocation of this particular method, as per our point cut expression, this particular aspect is being called, right? So that is again another point cut expression for you. After that, the annotation we have seen. After that we have args, right? So args is basically whichever function have given args, you apply the point cut on that. So let's say integer, right? So here we have a method which have integer args. Now let me reload and let's see what happens. Now if you can see over here, our application started crashing, right, drastically. Now why this is happening is because, do you see our particular aspect is being called many times, right? Because there will be lot of methods inside your Spring framework which will have integer as a parameter, right? So that is creating basically chaos over here. So you need to be mindful whenever you are trying to use this particular args, right? That is the use of args basically. So it will match whatever arguments you want to pass. Now the another flavor of this is, let's say you don't have integer and let's say some object over here. So this is basically not a primitive data type. So here what is happening, so what you can do over here is you can pass the path to util over here. So what you can do is you can copy this particular class name and do util, right? So this is how you can handle it when it comes to a object instead of having a primitive, right? And so that is basically args for you. And next one is @args, right? Matches any method with particular parameter, which is kind of a method argument, and that particular class is annotated with particular annotation. So it may sound confusing. Let's see the example, right? So here what I'm doing, @args, and I'm just passing component over here, right? So the use case of that is, let's say I have this get student which is accepting util as an argument, right? And this util have component annotation. So whatever functions are present inside this particular util, before execution of this function our aspect will be called. So that is the basically definition of @args, right? So basically whatever function is accepting util as an argument and that particular util have component annotation, before execution of functions inside this particular class, this particular function will be invoked. So that is the use of your args, right? So that is how you read it, right? This is again the special use case, right? Now component, when I'm trying to start the application, there will be multiple such use cases, so it's again failing, right? So this is useful when we create a custom annotation inside your application, right? You can create a custom annotation and that particular custom annotation, if you add it over here, then you can use that particular here and call your aspect over here, right? So that is according to your use case, you can play with this particular point cut expressions, right? Now that is args for us. Next one is target. Matches any method on particular instance of a class, right? Now in order to demonstrate, I will just create an object of util over here, which is kind of our component, and I will again auto wire that. And here what we can do, util dot, and we can call student utility, which is kind of a method inside that util package. And this is basically the function where we are printing this particular string, right? So what we can do here now is I will replace this with target, I will see util, and inside that we have util class basically. So it's basically the path of this util class. So target matches any method on particular instance of a class, right? Now target means that whenever instance of this particular class, that is util, is used to call any method inside that particular class. So I am using util.student class, right? So on that particular function, this our aspect will be invoked, right? So again, whenever a object of this particular class is used, which we are using over here, so object is basically instance. So whenever we are invoking any function with the instance of this particular class, our aspect will be called. So that is basically the meaning of your target, right? Again, one more time I will reiterate. So when we use the object of this particular class and we call any method, before calling that particular method, this particular function will be called. So here we are using that instance. When we call this particular method, before calling this particular method, our aspect will be called. Now if I hit this particular endpoint again, it should be invoked, right? So if you see over here, aspect is invoked. After that, this student utility is invoked, and after that this particular get student is basically called, right? That is basically target. So that marks the end of your point cut expression. So we have seen all the point cut expression by now. So next we will see is combination of these point cut expressions, right? So this is basically you can combine two or more point cut expressions inside a single expression by using and or, right? For example, let's see one example over here. So if you see this example over here, so this particular point cut expression says that I want to call this particular method before the execution of this particular controller, that is any method inside this particular controller, right? So this is basically the point cut expression that we have already seen. And I also want to call this particular method within the classes which are annotated with service, right? So what we can do is let me just uncomment this and reload this application, and let's see what happens now. So it is up. So let me invoke the API and let's see what happens. So our aspect is not called. Why it was not called? Because it is trying to find the controller which is marked with @service, right? Because it is an AND case, right? Here we have AND case. So here we don't have service. So to demonstrate, what we can do here is we can convert this guy to REST controller. So REST controller comes from, let's copy this only and put it there. So this is basically AND condition. So both the conditions should match, then only this function will be called, right? So let me reload this and let's see. So application is up. Let me invoke it again. So now it should be called, right? So as you can see, our aspect is being called, right? And the other condition, so let's say we want to make the other condition work, service, and what we can do, instead of and, you can just pass or, and let's reload this application. Now let's see what happens, right? So here if I go back and hit this again, now it is being invoked 2 times, right? Or condition is working perfectly. 2 times it is being called. So in and, both the conditions should be true. In or, either one of the conditions should be true, right? So here on service this is being called, and here in the controller it is being called again, right? So those are 2 invocations basically, and that's how you can make use of and or, right? So those are kind of a boolean and or boolean or, which you can use in your point cut expression according to your use case, right? Whatever you want, right? According to that you can use that. Another thing to look into is named point cut. Okay, so what is named point cut? Basically what you can do is you can create a function, let's say. So what you can do, you can create another function and provide your point cut expression using @pointcut, and what you can do over here is you can just use that particular point cut expression. So this will just be the name of that particular function. So this is basically, this is something which we called as named point cut, right? You can just name your point cut expressions so that it is more readable, right? And you can pass it over here, and this function should always be empty. There should not be anything inside this function when we are using named parameter basically, right? Now if we reload this application, it should work in same way. It is up. Now let's just try to hit it quickly. Now as you can see, same thing is printed. It's just a different way of implementing your point cut expressions, right? Named point cut basically, right? Now named point cut also we have seen. Now next is advice. Now advice, what is advice? It is an action. So we have already seen it is kind of a function which is taken before, after, or around the method invocation. Now at the rate before, at the rate after we have already seen, right? So this is basically before, after example also we have seen. Now another point over here is around. Around is again a important thing, right? So let's check that out now. So what is around? So around is basically before and after both. Let me just write some code over here. So I've just added this particular chunk of code over here. This is basically something which we want to perform before, and this statement over here is calling your method, and this is something which we want to perform after calling that method, right? So that is the meaning of around. You can just call the method on your own by using join point. Okay, so join point is basically something which will allow you to proceed with the method invocation. So proceed method will actually call that particular method before which this particular method is being called, right? Or what I will do, just to keep things simple, I will just remove this so that we will just look on only on one service, right? I will just use within service, right? Within classes which are annotated with @ service, right? Now let's try to invoke, right? Now if you see over here, first your student utility is invoked, so let's ignore that. Then we have get student. So first we got before logger, right? So this particular logger. After that the method was invoked, get student in service class. After that after logger is called, so this particular statement, and after that the student is returned, right? This is how you can make use of around annotation to perform task before and after invocating your particular method at the same time, right? So that is basically around for you, right? Before, after, and around, three things we have seen. Now most of the things we have covered inside aspect oriented programming, so that's pretty much it. But by now you may have these many questions, right? You may be wondering that how aspect is working under the hood, right? How Spring is managing invocation of aspect before executing the actual function. It is invoking these many functions, right? And what will happen if you have 1,000 aspect in your application, right? All of them will be rendered, all of the point cut expression will be rendered. Then what will happen to latency of your application? Will that particular aspect slow down your application because it will have lot of functions to invoke within actual invocation of your function? That these are the questions which are normal to come in your mind, right? And basically anyone could think in this direction, right? So let's get all these questions answered in the upcoming video. The next video I will cover what is happening under the hood. So if you want to understand what is happening under the hood, which is very interesting thing, then wait for next video. If you don't want to miss that particular video, subscribe Code Snippet now, and don't forget to hit the bell icon as well so that you will get the notification, right? So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you like the video, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe, share this video with your friends so that they also will learn aspect oriented programming. That's it for this video. See you in the next video.